Lady Beechworth spun to face her with her skirts flaring as she did. A bit gory, this pastime of yours. Some gruesome sketches accompanied the articles. Entirely inaccurate, but Rain assumed it was to sell newspapers rather than to be informative. More than a bit gory. What brings you here, Lady Beechworth? Rain hoped it had nothing to do with the night before and the rigmarole that had happened at the ball. A bit of a scandal, actually. I thought I'd come to see you as you would know just how important it is to keep this all silent. Rain motioned for Lady Beechworth to take a seat. She settled and smoothed her skirts nervously. This comforted Rain as she recognized the movements of a typical female client. Rain silently offered her a cup of tea. Lady Beechworth mumbled a thank you. She had almost finished the cup before she spoke again. She didn't prevaricate at all. You see, I'm being blackmailed. In the tone of telling her that the weather would be cloudy, it left Rain a little shocked. Blackmailed? Surely you haven't done anything of note. Lady Beechworth was her mother's age. She doubted she had the energy to get into the kind of trouble that would benefit a blackmailer. Lady Beechworth waved it off and added, a little youthful indiscretion. Unfortunately, this behavior is tolerated in men but not in women. My girls are at an age where this could be very damaging. So, I hired a man to make inquiries. He uncovered an address. But now he refuses to do anything about it. Lady Beechworth dug out a small scrap of paper from her reticule sitting on her lap. Here is the address where the blackmailer lives. She reached over the desk with the slip of paper between two of her glove-covered fingers. Rain accepted the paper as she asked, why the caution on your investigator's part? He must be decent to have uncovered this. Apparently the man is an ex-police officer. The investigator is hesitant to step on any toes. The department had only been an entity for less than 3 years. For someone to first have a career as an officer and to lose that career, meant he was probably notorious. She would ask Larkin later as he had been working longer than her and actually spoke with the other investigators. She hadn't made friends amongst the others, but it would be suicide to go after a former officer without finding out all she knew about the situation. If he was liked by the other officers and she arrested him, she would become a pariah amongst her colleagues. Well, more of a pariah. Lady Beechworth knew her standing in the department was precarious. But I'm bulletproof from scandal? Rain asked incredulous. Yes, your godfather is Charles Rowan. You can't be fired. So frankly dear, you are bulletproof. Her job, yes, but any relationship she might vaguely have with the other officers would die an early death. Rain smoothed out the note with the address under her hand and said, I'll look into it. Lady Beechworth beamed. You are a dear. Lady Beechworth had barely left when Fields entered with a large rifle. He laid it on her table. I heard your suspect is a dragon. You'll be needing this. Make sure you shoot him when he is in his human form. Hiding a dragon body is problematic with the treaty. How he had known she was going to question Victor was an amazing show of gossip in the department. Maines must have mentioned which file she was looking at and jumped to some conclusions based on the drama at the ball the other night. Fields laid a case of shells on the table next to the gun. He nodded to her and left. Rain was speechless. The gun was big enough to take down an elephant, the prey it was most likely made for. Killing Victor would be more than problematic as she wasn't sure he was the right suspect. There were too many holes in any of her theories. Besides, why would a dragon leave a body in the first place if he was the one who had murdered the mutilated man in the alleyway? Fields should have advocated for a trial, but again, that was also more than problematic. A human government daring to give judgment on a dragon would upset both the Empire and the dragons. Larkin walked in and tested the rifle by lifting it up to his shoulder and closing an eye to imitate taking a shot. He returned it to the desk with a click of his tongue in admiration. A beauty. Is that one of Fields'? He treats those like babies. He must have started to trust you if he is lending you one of his children. Rain wasn't sure this development in her relationship with Fields pleased her. She preferred it when he avoided her because of girl cooties or something else equally ridiculous. She glared at Larkin, who put up his hands in defense. I know that look. Rosie looks at me like that when I say something stupid. Rosie. Larkin blushed, which was a sight to see. There was little that embarrassed Larkin. He shuffled his feet and admitted reluctantly, my girl. She works in the shop on Masters. Good on you, Larkin. You deserve a good lady. She really meant it, but it also jarred her version of the world. Larkin was her work partner and she had never seen him as a possible mate. For someone else to see him that way merely surprised her, though it shouldn't. Rain reached for the rifle to put it away, using her metal hand. It ground with a screech that had her wincing in audible pain. Larkin tugged on his ear, pretending he hadn't been hurt by the sound. Needs to be looked at, I think. Chapter 5. Rain found Everett occupied in his workshop. She leaned against the doorway to watch him work. The room was cluttered with the skeletons of 1,000 projects that hung from the ceiling or sat gathering dust on shelves. Everett worked at a large table that was mostly clear except for his current project. It looked like a basket with a weird disc-shaped thing on top, but shaped more like a screw that was flattened. Everett had his tongue sticking out the side of his mouth as he worked. Hey, Magamisa. Everett looked up at the old childhood nickname. One that Gregory had given him whenever he worked. It was a word from Africa that referred to his tongue sticking out. He flashed her a grin before he went back to his work. Rain looked over his shoulder and asked, what is it? The flying thing that got me into trouble. It got a bit damaged when the teachers sent the students to take it down. I managed to get it back with the promise to never bring it to school again. She wondered if he had given that promise because he didn't think he would be going back either. Are you going back? She asked, though she could probably guess the answer. I don't know, he answered distractedly, as he continued to work on his flying machine. Her brother was brilliant for him to sound so dejected, broke her a little. Rain put her metal hand in front of his face, forcing him to stop his repairs on the flying device. I need some maintenance. It's making screeching noises. He motioned to a stool. She rested her hand on the table and asked, do I have to take it off? Pulling the stool closer with the tip of her toes, she took a seat. Let's see what's wrong first. To demonstrate, she closed her fist and though it didn't screech, it certainly made a grinding sound. Sounds like some dirt has gotten in there. Yeah, I think you'll have to take it off. He motioned to the other end of the workroom where she could have some privacy behind a set of freestanding shelves. Rain plucked at her buttons behind the screen and said, the dragon, Victor, would probably be interested in your flying device. My hand certainly fascinated him. She had to raise her voice a little to make sure he heard her on the other side of the room. He has probably seen better. It's just a toy. His voice was distracted, so he was likely finishing up with his flying machine. You shouldn't put yourself down. You make wonderful creations. Without you I'd have to send for Jasmine every time my hand gave me trouble. I would be weeks without it and I've had enough of claws and hooks to know how superior this hand is. Rain unbuckled the straps holding on her hand once she had divested herself of her bodice. The hand came loose and left an imprint on the stump of her arm. There were elaborate scars from the original injury that had turned silver over the years. They weren't even painful anymore, though she could still remember it as a dull ache that never seemed to leave her bones. The hand was also superior in comfort. Her previous attachments had often rubbed her raw. They had left their own mark on her arm as well over time. Her mother had discovered an ointment that had smoothed most of those away over the years she had the brass hand. The doctor had only taken off the part where the bone had been shattered into tiny slivers and had left the whole part even though it wasn't pretty. It meant she still had her elbow, which increased her agility. She placed her mechanical hand on a clear shelf and slipped her bodice back on. The buttons were difficult with one hand, but for most of Rain's life she had to deal with the lack of the limb. The buttons were also designed for ease of use. They were on the front as well, so that wasn't much of an issue. She still wore her Bobby uniform, and it had originally been designed for men who didn't require others to dress them nearly as much as women did. Though the trend was leaning towards more practical outfits for women as time passed. She wouldn't be surprised to find outfits with pockets as the norm. Once redressed, she picked up her hand and came around the shelf. Everett had cleared off the table, so he could work on her hand. "Do you think I could make a job of this?" he asked, as he motioned for her to hand over her prose thesis. "In a heartbeat." "Is that what you're thinking?" He shrugged and she let it drop. He took her hand and carefully took off the shielding of articulated brass. Inside, the bones of the machine were made from steel and some crystals. Everett didn't touch those. Instead, he looked at the shielding first. He used a lantern to look inside and with a swab cleaned out the inside. Everett scowled at the dirty swab and asked, "Is that blood?" "Almost definitely." She wasn't even sure if it came from the body they had investigated yesterday or another. "If I say yes, will you get mad?" "No," disgusted. "Why can't you use your other hand? That one is much easier to clean." He stuck out his tongue again, as he went back to cleaning out the intricacies of her prosthetic. "Yes, but it also can feel the blood. The sensory feedback on the metal isn't nearly as keen as my real flesh." He wrinkled his nose, probably at the prospect of touching a murdered man's innards. He must have felt the same, as he didn't bring it up again. When he was finished, he put it all back together and handed it to her. "Check to make sure it is no longer screeching." She put on the hand without the brace. The ends connected with the parts embedded inside her flesh. Flexing her fingers, she moved the articulated plates. Taking it off, she handed it back. "Looks good. Better yet, it sounds good." Everett took it apart again, this time working on the innards of the hand. He dipped another swab into a jar of grease and worked it into the joints of the articulated parts. He cleaned out the innards of her hand with a lot more care than he had shown to the brass. This was the part none of them could replicate. Everett said, "I wish I could make this. Some of your machines are close." He could make the articulated brass covering and even the steel structure inside. It was the augmented intelligence in the crystals, which made all of this possible, that was beyond his ability. A technology taught by the dragons to humans who then applied it in ways the dragons had never imagined. Some but none of them could give the senses that you come from this. "That is dragon magic." His voice wistful. "It isn't magic, it's science." Rain didn't like the worship of dragons. They weren't gods. It might as well be magic. They can manipulate the essence of the universe. He finished with the cleaning and handed it back to her. "Good as new. Now you can give society the finger without making a grinding noise as you do it." "Hardy, ha ha," she replied as she took back her hand. Chapter 6. Rain watched Larkin tug on the collar of his shirt. This was the 5th or 6th time he had done that. Glancing at him, she asked him, "A little too much starch?" "First time for starch. I never bother with it." He didn't sound annoyed, but rather bewildered. "Rosie." It was the only explanation for the change in his laundry routine and for the confused tone. "Yes, she says my clothes need an upgrade. I was all right with replaced buttons and the pressing, but I think I could do without the starch. But not without Rosie." His silence was significant. It was clear he wasn't used to the idea of having a significant other. Rain also wondered if he had thought about his feelings at all, beyond that he enjoyed being with her. It was amusing to watch him stumbling in new territory. Larkin asked, "Are you sure we shouldn't have brought that rifle?" The dragon had a place on Wilton Crescent. It was in a neighborhood where they hired people to look after the exterior. This was probably good foresight of the dragon, who hadn't been in his Londinium home in over 4 years. Rain checked her appearance, as subtly as possible, but she shouldn't have bothered, as Larkin was fighting his own clothes and didn't notice her discreet adjustments. If he saw her, he would probably rip her for vanity. "I'm not going to meet a dragon with a gun that is the same size as me. Firstly, it will mean I won't get that conversation I wanted, and secondly, I'll look weak, as if I needed the gun to face him. I'm not afraid of the dragon. Reports say he almost ate you the other night." Her hope that word had not trickled down to all levels of society went up in a flash of smoke. He reacted badly seeing the ring, but there was no danger of him actually eating me. Rain gave the door a sharp knock, and stepped back to wait for the butler. The door opened on the dragon himself. He looked like someone had rolled him around on the carpet and the static had created his hairstyle. His clothes were beyond rumpled as he mumbled, "What do you want? Can we talk?" He eyed her up and down, then looked at Larkin, who stood a step behind her on her right. Brought muscle this time. Scared? He leaned on the doorframe, most likely to remain upright. "No, at the moment, you're just pathetic." He certainly was, with his unkempt appearance and still in the clothes he had worn the night before. "I appreciate being demeaned by a civil servant. It puts me in my place," he deadpanned. Victor stepped back so they could enter. He rubbed his face, as he stumbled through the dim corridors, and she followed him. "I wasn't expecting visitors, so I don't have anything to serve you." "Unless you want some bourbon," he offered. Rain wrinkled her nose at the prospect. "I didn't think so." Victor threw himself onto a dusty love seat. Or possibly fell. He didn't look entirely steady on his feet. He waved dismissively for them to take their own seats. Larkin wisely remained standing, but Rain politely accepted his offer. She dusted off most of the detritus with her mechanical hand, as she didn't want to feel the lingering grime. Still, she sat on only the barest edge of the seat. Hands placed in perfect ladylike grace on her lap. "I take it you haven't been in Londinium for a while." The rumors said at least 4 years, but she would rather have confirmation. It certainly was suspicious that he had returned just as a body connected to his wife also was discovered in Londinium. "A few years, I think. I left in a bit of a hurry, forgot to close up the house like I usually do." There was no guile in his voice, so she assumed he had no better idea than the ton about how long he had been out of the city. Besides, dragons were known to be cavalier with dates as they were so long-lived. A year or 2 didn't make much difference either way. He eyed the state of his house with bewilderment. She wondered if he expected to be gone this long. "You could hire servants," Rain suggested, recognizing the ploy for pity. Her mother tried the same, but Victor was not as sophisticated as Lady Ancaster. "Dragons don't hire servants, we collect them." Rain wasn't going to touch the issue of collections. They were quasi-slavery, as far as she understood the whole relationship, with a touch of family thrown in. Instead, she brought out the ring again. Victor's eyes were drawn to the handkerchief. He leaned closer to study the ring. "Is that blood?" "Yes, we found it on a dead man's body yesterday." "Are you willing to answer some questions?" Her prim sitting position only added to her professional air. She didn't want the dragon to become emotional, otherwise they might have a repeat of the night before. The sitting room was already in a state. She didn't think it would survive the transformation of the dragon to his full size. "Maybe. What is in it for me?" His eyes were now on her mechanical hand instead of the ring. It was true, dragons were fascinated with the unusual. "How about a deal? You answer one of my questions and I'll answer one of yours." Interest flickered in his eyes, chasing away some of the liquored days. She asked first before he could start, knowing whoever started had the power in the conversation. Is this Eleanor's ring? Was she wearing it when she left? Yes. It should have an engraving inside with her name. It was especially made for her. There aren't any others like it. How did you lose the hand? It was a carriage accident when I was about 9. It was the middle of winter and my brother was sick. We were rushing to see a doctor when the carriage lost control and we tipped over. We were thrown about and my hand got trapped. It was crushed. They had to amputate or risk gangrene. Why did Eleanor leave you? We weren't a good match. I made a mistake. So, she left. She raised an eyebrow. He was keeping things from her or outright lying. Even the lie told her something. He was embarrassed by the reason she left. There was little that could shame a dragon, but getting it wrong with their mate was one of them. So, she let it slide. He asked, "Who made your hand?" "Jasmine Cavendish." If he was going to lie, then she would give him only what he asked and nothing more. A woman. Fascinating. He rubbed his chin, which was in need of a shave, and found a spot that needed a scratch, as he contemplated the woman who had made Rain's hand. He was most likely deciding whether Jasmine was worthy of his collection. After all, that was what dragons did with unique people. She is married to a dragon. Rain stalled his plans with this free bit of information. Too late then. He jokingly commented. Obviously not heartbroken by not being able to collect Jasmine. Taking control of the conversation again, she brought them back to the interrogation. "Do you know who murdered your wife?" "Yes, Sebastian Carmel, otherwise known as Head Basher Carmel." "Why do they call you Lady Goldenhand?" He had clearly been asking about her, as he hadn't known her nickname last night when they had first met. Who he had been talking to while in this state she wasn't sure, but she didn't pry either. She suppressed the sigh. "When I was about 10, my father had my first hand made. It was rudimentary with a brass claw. Of course, others mocked me for it, but they also wanted an easy cover if my father ever heard the name. Golden Hand can be complimentary, but really it was to degrade me. I don't answer to the name." His whiskey gold eye sparked with amusement, which she didn't appreciate. He was worse than Everett, who always thought the name was comical and apt. "You should take it back for your own." Rain flushed red but didn't take the bait. "Did you ever meet Sebastian?" She had seen the name in the records. So, the man had been pardoned, but eventually had paid for the crime. That was if he was truly guilty. She wasn't entirely sure of that. Yes. He worked for Eleanor. When I found out they were going to pardon him, I thought I would confront him. He was at the Maidenhair. Drunk. He mocked me for being impotent. I left Londinium altogether. How does it work? I haven't the foggiest. She flexed the hand so he could see the extent of its abilities. That isn't fair, I answered your questions. He dramatically pouted, putting debutantes to shame with the fat lip. At least he dropped the subtle from his manipulations. You have kept things from me. They all looked towards the door as they heard knocking. Larkin went to see who would be knocking on the door of the dragon, as it was clear the dragon wasn't in any condition to be welcoming anyone or expecting guests.